Picture this. It's 2 million years ago, somewhere on the African savanna, and the sun has just dropped below the horizon. Within minutes, you go from being a mid-tier predator with decent eyesight to one of the most vulnerable animals on the continent. Lions can see roughly 6 times better than you in the dark. Hyenas can smell you before you ever see them. And you, a soft-skinned, slow, clawless primate, are now functionally blind, stumbling around in a world built for creatures that have spent millions of years perfecting the art of seeing in the dark. By every reasonable measure, night should have been off-limits to us. So here's the question that should bother you more than it probably does. How did a species this poorly equipped for darkness end up ruling it? Let's start with just how badly built we are for night vision, because the gap is almost embarrassing. Most nocturnal predators have a structure called the tapetum lucidum, a reflective layer behind the eye that bounces light back through the eye for a second pass, which is why a cat's eyes glow in your headlights. Humans don't have one. We rely almost entirely on rod cells for low-light vision, and even those take up to 40 minutes to fully adapt to darkness, a process called dark adaptation. Compare that to an owl, which can detect a mouse's movement using 100 times less light than we'd need to see the same thing. Add to this our lack of claws, lack of fangs, lack of speed, and you start to understand why early hominins almost certainly treated nightfall the way you'd treat a locked door. You don't go through it, you wait until morning. But here's what's fascinating. The fossil and archaeological record suggests that at some point we didn't just tolerate the night, we started using it. And the first real clue as to when that shift began comes from something almost shockingly mundane: ash. At Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, researchers found burned bone and ash deposits dating back roughly 1 million years, some of the earliest strong evidence of fire use by early humans, likely Homo erectus. Then, at Gesher Benot Yaakov in Israel, archaeologist Nama Goren and her team uncovered repeated layers of burned flint and wood spanning roughly 790,000 years, evidence not of a single lucky campfire, but of habitual, sustained fire use across generations. This is the hinge point, because fire doesn't just mean warmth, fire means light, and light means the night is no longer absolute. Once a hominin group could keep a fire burning, the entire risk calculation around darkness changed. Predators that had ruled the night for millions of years suddenly had a reason to keep their distance. Studies on modern lion behavior around human camps consistently show that big cats avoid fire-lit areas, even when prey is nearby. Fire didn't make humans powerful in the dark, it made the dark less dangerous, and that's a different thing, but it's the thing that mattered. Now here's where it gets interesting, because controlling fire is one thing, hunting in the dark, actually using the night as a tool instead of just surviving it, is an entirely different evolutionary leap. And for evidence of that, you don't need to dig in the dirt, you need to look at the people who, until astonishingly recently, were still living something close to that ancestral lifestyle. In 2016, researchers led by Pagani and colleagues studied the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer population in Tanzania, and tracked their activity levels using accelerometers across different phases of the lunar cycle. What they found was striking. Hadza nocturnal activity wasn't random. It rose and fell in sync with the moon. Around the full moon, when the savanna was bathed in enough light to actually see by, nighttime movements spiked. Around the new moon, when darkness was total, activity dropped off sharply, especially activity outside of camp. In other words, even today, with no conscious calculation involved, human behavior is still shaped by a risk-reward equation that was likely written into us hundreds of thousands of years ago. Go out when there's light to see predators coming, stay close to the fire when there isn't. So the moon, it turns out, was humanity's first night vision device, and once you start looking for it, the evidence shows up everywhere. The San Bushmen of the Kalahari have long histories of nocturnal hunting practices, including tracking and capturing spring hares at night using torches or burning brands to disorient the animals, exploiting the fact that many small nocturnal prey species freeze or become confused when suddenly exposed to firelight. That's not a coincidence. That's a hunting strategy built entirely around the idea that darkness, instead of being something to escape, could be weaponized against the very animals best adapted to live in it. But moonlight and firelight only get you so far. They explain how early humans coped with the dark. They don't fully explain why humans became hunters who specifically operated during the low light hours of dusk, dawn, and sometimes deep night, rather than purely in daylight like most other primates. For that, you have to look at something stranger, our bodies themselves. In 2004, biologists Dennis Bramble and Daniel Lieberman published a now famous paper arguing that humans evolved as endurance runners, specifically suited for something called persistence hunting, the practice of literally running prey to exhaustion over long distances in extreme heat. We have a dense network of sweat glands, more than 2 million of them, and almost no body hair to trap that heat in, which makes us exceptional at thermoregulation compared to virtually every other mammal our size. A pronghorn antelope can outrun you in a sprint without breaking a sweat, but you, over 6, 8, 10 miles in the heat of the day, you don't have to stop and pant. You just keep moving. Here's the twist, though, and it's the part that connects all of this together. Persistence hunting under the African sun is so metabolically brutal that hunters following this strategy often had to begin in the relative cool of early morning or push into the evening to avoid heat stroke themselves. Researchers studying modern persistence hunters, including work by Louis Liebenberg with San trackers in the Kalahari, have documented hunts beginning before sunrise, specifically to exploit cooler temperatures and to track animals using spoor left in the cool, damp conditions of dawn. So the same biology that made us terrifyingly effective long-distance hunters also nudged us toward operating at the edges of daylight, right where night begins to bleed into day. We weren't just tolerating darkness anymore, we were timing our most important survival behavior around it. So what about actual nighttime, the deep dark hours, with no moon, no twilight, nothing? Here's you have to bring in the brain, because this is where biology hands off to cognition. Coordinated night hunting, the kind that goes beyond opportunistically clubbing something near the firelight, requires planning, communication, and trust between group members who can't fully see each other. That requires language sophisticated enough to coordinate roles in the dark, and it requires social bonds strong enough that you trust the person next to you to not panic, not to bolt, not get you both killed. Anthropologist Polly Weissner's 2014 study of the Juhansi people in the Kalahari found something that seems almost poetic in hindsight. Daytime conversations among the Juhansi were dominated by practical matters, complaints, economic disputes, gossip about resources. But nighttime conversations around the fire shifted dramatically towards storytelling. Nearly 81% of recorded firelit conversation involved narrative, often myths, histories, and social knowledge passed between generations. Weissner argued that firelight created a unique social context, one that flattened hierarchy, extended emotional bonding, and transmitted cultural knowledge in a way that bright, task-focused daylight simply didn't allow. Which means the campfire wasn't just a tool against predators, it became a second classroom, running on a totally different curriculum than the daylight hours. Daytime taught you how to survive physically. Nighttime, by the fire, taught you how to survive socially, how to belong to something larger than yourself. And a group that trusts each other, that shares a deep well of common stories and rules, is exactly the kind of group that can attempt something as dangerous as a coordinated hunt after dark. Here's the part nobody talks about. All of this, the fire, the moonlight tracking, the endurance physiology, the storytelling, wasn't separate, it was compounding. Fire gave you a foothold against nocturnal predators. Moonlight gave you a window of visibility to act within. Endurance physiology gave you a reason to operate at the edges of daylight where temperatures were survivable. And language and storytelling gave you the social glue to actually trust your hunting partner enough to act as a coordinated unit once the sun went down. Strip out any one of those 4 pillars and the others probably collapse. You can have fire and still be too disorganized to hunt effectively by it. You can have endurance and still be too vulnerable without fire to protect your camp while you're gone. It had to all click into place roughly together, somewhere in that long stretch between Homo erectus controlling flame nearly 1 million years ago and fully modern humans by at least 100,000 years ago, demonstrably living, cooking, and likely hunting in coordinated groups around controlled fires across Africa and the Levant. So when did humans start hunting at night? The honest answer is that there's no single date you can circle on a timeline, no neat "this is the year." It was a slow erosion of an ancient boundary, beginning with embers kept alive in a cave 1 million years ago, refined by generations who learned to read moonlight like a survival manual, sharpened by bodies built to keep moving long after other animals had to stop, and finally locked into culture by storytellers who used the dark itself as a stage. And maybe that's the real reframe here. You started this story imagining a creature that should have been prey the second the sun went down. Soft, slow, blind in the dark, defenseless against animals built for exactly those conditions. But that same vulnerable creature didn't outmatch the night through claws, eyes, or speed. It did it by refusing to accept the terms night offered. It borrowed light from fire. It borrowed light from the moon. It borrowed endurance from its own strange biology, and then it borrowed courage from the people sitting next to it in the dark. Somewhere along that long, accumulating chain of small advantages, the most exposed animal on the savanna quietly became the only one the night couldn't fully claim.